Hello, everybody. Hello out there, folks watching the replay. Hi, how are you? Thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for watching. Hi, everybody. How are you? Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to get started in just a minute. How's everybody doing tonight? How are you? We ready for some Tiger King? I hope so. We're ready for the Tiger King here. Got my little tigers. Courtesy of my kids. My little tiger crew here. Really, these were just the stuffed animals that we could find quickly. Hi, Sean Kelsey. How are you? We got a bunch of these guys. We'll pop them in when we're good and ready. Hi, Shelly. How are you? All right, so we're ready to get started. So, like so many of you, I have thoroughly enjoyed watching the Tiger King, the disaster that's known as the Tiger King. Hi, Sheila. For those of you who don't know, if you haven't seen this yet, first of all, go run to Netflix and watch it. It's the absolute disaster that we need right now. You'll see I am full on ready with my Marone Law Firm Digi-Camo shirt and my Syracuse University camouflage hat. I'm live to you tonight. I'm going to go by the name, I think, Anthony Exotic, if you will. I hope you'll allow me to use that term for tonight. Coming to you live from Marone Law Firm East, where I've done a bunch of webinars on really serious stuff lately affecting small businesses and individuals in this country. So I thought we'd take a brief pause from some of the seriousness and have some fun tonight. So the Tiger King documentary, available now on Netflix if you haven't seen it, tells the tale of Joe Exotic, who is a tiger lover from Oklahoma. And I believe he describes himself as a gun-toting, gay, tiger-loving redneck who owns a zoo in Oklahoma that's filled with wild animals, pitted against one Carole Baskin of Big Cat Rescue, also a tiger lover, and she is attempting to thwart Joe Exotic and stop him from operating his zoo. And then there's a bunch of other wildlife owners that are focused in the show as well, but it's primarily the tale of Joe Exotic and his beef with Carole Baskin. And what I wanted to talk about tonight was a portion of the program where there's this discussion about Carole potentially having killed her first husband, or second husband, I'm sorry, Don Lewis, and the fallout from that. The legal troubles that she went through as a result of that, combined with how Joe Exotic used that allegation against her potentially in the program. And the basic story is that in 1997, Carole Baskin's second husband, I kept calling him the first husband, he was actually the second husband, Don Lewis, disappeared. Never heard from again. Dropped off the face of the earth. Now, there is investigation into whether Carole is the one that killed him or fed him to the tigers. We don't really know. But what I want to focus in on is the allegation from Don's family. They're featured prominently throughout the documentary, combined with Ann McQueen, Don's secretary. And they all kind of paint this picture of Carole as manipulating them and stealing Don's money, and that's how she got the money to do Big Cat Rescue. So I want to dive into that a little bit. If you can, before we get much further, share this stream, click the share button so that we can get a bunch of folks in here who love Tiger King just like we do. I'm your host for the evening, Anthony Exotic. And there's this discussion by Anne McQueen of how Carole came and took Don's will. And so Don Lewis disappears, and Carole Baskin shows up at his office where Anne is, and has taken his will and taken his power of attorney. So for me, an estate planning lawyer, immediately red flags are going off, right? For any estate planning lawyer who does this regularly, I just appalled that the client would have the original will and the original power of attorney right underneath his desk. And that's not the whole story here, but just a little brief side note from an estate planning perspective, not the best idea to keep original estate planning documents under your desk, available where everybody can see them, take them, get access to them. Normally, you'd like to keep them in a safe, preferably with your lawyer. That being said, and they interviewed Don Lewis's lawyer, and he doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence. But with that being said, right away with the power of attorney, we have one of the most bizarre lines I've ever seen in a legal document. At the very tippy top of the document, and this is featured in the show, and this is what got me kind of to do some research. It says that the power of attorney, which allows you to manage someone's finances if they're unable to do it for themselves, the power of attorney shall not be affected by any disability or disappearance. And that line, that or disappearance, I've talked to a lot of lawyers in the past week about this, and we've never, ever seen that line in a form power of attorney. I'm in New York, I've looked at probably thousands of powers of attorney in New York, and certainly had occasion to review Florida powers of attorney, never seen it. Don't think it should have been in there. Very suspect about that document right away. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that the power of attorney document is usually only good for as long as the person is living. So if I give power of attorney to my wife, Melissa, that power of attorney, her authority would end when I pass away. Now, because Don's not declared legally dead for 5 years, in theory, Carole Baskin has the ability to run amok with his finances for 5 years. There's discussion in the movie or in the documentary about how much money Don may have had, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Carole basically has a 5-year runway to spend his money. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In the documentary, you see Don and Don's first wife and kids, and Anne McQueen, the secretary, kind of aligned together. And they claim that the kids only ended up with 10% of Don's money. And they're making it seem like they're basically saying Carole took his money. Now, the great thing, probably the only good thing about the legal system in the state of Florida is that most of the court records are available online. So being stuck home, even though we've been really busy at the Marone Law Firm, I had some extra time over the weekend, and I wanted to kind of look and see, could I find these records? And I was able to, and I'm going to pop the link here for those of you who are interested. I'm going to write in the link. It is hover.hillsclerk.com. So you go to that link, hover.hillsclerk.com, and you will find what I found, which is a voluminous docket. Donald Jack Lewis, case number 97-CP-00-2001. This is a 42-page docket. And a docket is just a fancy word for the list of filings in a case. So we've got a 42-page docket. And it starts out as what's called a conservatorship. in New York and other states, this is also called guardianship. So you go to hover.hillsclerk.com, and if you search by, it won't come up if you search Carole Baskin, because at the time she was Carol Lewis, married to Don Lewis. If you search for Jack Donald Lewis, this will come up. Now, this is a guardianship. So what happens is Carole initially applies to become conservator, but I'm going to use the term guardian because that's what we call, that's what we are in New York. Becomes guardian of Don's property. Now she files to become the sole guardian, which is not surprising because she's the spouse and it's a blended family, second marriage. And the kids immediately oppose this. The kids immediately object to this. And what happens pretty quickly, actually, is the kids eventually agree that Carole can be the guardian, but they stipulate that she's going to be co-guardian with a gentleman by the name of Douglas Staley, who appears to be a professional money manager in the state of Florida in the Tampa area. So the kids actually consented to Carole acting as guardian as long as she had a co-guardian, co-conservator to act with her. Now, what we can't tell, even though this docket is, 42 pages and 580 documents that were filed, what you can't tell is what the haggling is that may have went on between Don Lewis's kids and Carole. And hindsight is 20/20. So of course now Don Lewis's kids are upset. They're convinced that Carole killed their dad. They're also convinced that she took all the money. So, they're painting her in the absolute most negative light. But at the time, back in 1998, when this happened, it seems that the situation was a little different, and they at least agreed to allow Carole to serve as guardian. So when the family makes this allegation, and I'm not going to defend Carole because we'll talk in a minute about whether you think she killed her husband or not. But when the family makes this allegation that Carole was running amok with Don's money and taking all of his money, they actually agreed to let her co-manage the property. So there's something to be said for, well, they at least at some point agreed to this type of relationship. Hi, Sam. How are you? How long ago did I buy this shirt? So we actually sponsored a kickball team a few years back, and they used these shirts for kickball, and they provided me with one. I don't know that I've worn it until tonight. I said today, I'm like, what do we have that I could pull off Tiger King? Does anybody have any tiger print? My wife didn't have any tiger print. We've got some stuffed tiger animals, and I've got the ability to play a little tiger sound effect. That's about it. So you get to come back. We're going through this. We're going through this docket, which you can print out and look through if you want. Going through this docket, I spent not a lot of time. I spent 15 minutes going through this docket, and I do a lot of these cases. I do not a lot of cases where the wife allegedly feeds the husband to tigers, but a lot of guardianship cases. And a lot of the stuff that happens is very common. And the one thing that you get right away is that the kids have agreed to allow Carole, at least initially, to be the guardian with a co-manager who's a professional. Now, another thing that I found very weird in the documentary that just didn't sing true to me practicing in this area of law was that they never seemed to be able to hone in on how much money Don had. And normally, for regular folks, there can be no real way to figure out how much money somebody has, right? However, when you're talking about guardianship, one of the things that has to happen in every state is that the guardians have to file what's called an inventory. And that did happen here. Carole Baskin and Doug Staley filed an inventory on March 10th, 1998, so not too long after this whole thing started. And it was verified, which means it was subject to the penalty of perjury. But we can see that they filed, let me see if you can see it, verified inventory of co-conservators. Now, here's the one bummer. this is what I'll tell you. Maybe somebody can get me the case file. We can go into deeper context here. But unlike a normal lawsuit in the state of Florida, where all the documents are public, or a normal probate when someone dies, where all the documents are public, in Florida, for conservatorships like this, the docket is public, so we have access to the docket, but we don't have access to the actual individual filings. Now, they are public record. I could get them. I don't know that anyone is in the Hillsborough County court right now with what's going on with coronavirus, but in theory, I could pay to have a copy of this docket, and maybe if there's enough interest, we'll look into that. Let me know if you want me to do that in the comments, and we'll see. We'll see if we go that route. But I was able to find a news article from 1997, around the same time that the conservatorship was filed, that says that as a result of the filing of the inventory, there was $4 million that Carole was in charge of. So not an insignificant amount of money. And this is in 1997. So, probably in today's dollars, a little bit higher than $4 million. And that's just what's in the conservatorship. So a judge had appointed Carole to be co-conservator with this Douglas Staley over this $4 million. The one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that doesn't mean that this is all of Don's money. Another thing that I found when going through the docket was that there was a trust that Don had created that was separate from the conservatorship. So Don had previously created a trust that Ann McQueen was in charge of. That's his assistant, his executive assistant. And we don't know how much money's in that trust, and we probably never will. Normally, trust filings like that remain private, and you wouldn't have access to being able to figure out what's in the trust. But we know that Carole's got at least $4 million under her control. Now, one thing that's very interesting is that and if you go to bigcatrescue.org, which is Carole Baskin's website, not that I'm trying to send traffic her way, but she's actually got this docket on there. I should print this out. She's got the docket, but she's written notes. So she's got little annotations in the docket, which I used for purposes of kind of putting this together, but I didn't print that one out. We're trying to conserve ink. The kids are using a lot of ink here for their projects at home. So the one thing that's interesting is that on August 31st, 1999, which is about, a year and a half into his disappearance, there's notes that she becomes the sole guardian or the sole conservator, which means that this Douglas Staley would have went away. You can't really tell why that happened or how it happened or how it was agreed to, but it's very interesting that for a couple years we have co-conservator, which in theory, by having a professional in there, potentially that's limiting the risk that Carole's going to make off with the money. Because the one thing that happens regularly in most guardianship cases is that there's annual filings, there's an annual accounting that you have to submit that lists every penny that you've spent. Now that doesn't mean that that it always gets reviewed and approved correctly, but certainly the kids would have been party to all of this and they would have had ample opportunity to object. So we don't know what the trust contained, but we know it's called the PSLR trust. And Ann McQueen is in charge of it, and it's got to have some amount of money in it. So Don Lewis at least has more than $4 million. My initial point is for the kids to get up and say and allege that Carole just took this money and made off with it, like there was no process or nothing that happened. Well, we've got a 42-page docket of them fighting with her. So I don't know why the filmmakers chose not to show the docket or not to go down that path. I don't know if it took too much away from Joe Exotic, but you got 587 items on this docket. So it's not as if Carole just was a thief in the night that made off with this money. So a few more points on what's in the filings. 2 months, less than 2 months after Carole gets appointed as co-guardian, she's already starting to sell Don's real property. There's a filing called the Petition to Approve the Sale of Real Property, which is very common. Anytime a guardian is trying to sell someone's residence or any other real estate, they have to get court permission to do that. I know that's the law in the state of New York and California and Florida. Probably most states, I'd assume, similar rules apply. So there would be a process for Carole to get this approval. Typically, most of the family members would receive notice of this proceeding. So what that means is that every time, and there's a bunch of these listings. So every time that Carole wanted to move money or sell something, she was going to court to seek authority, and they'd have to put the entire family, or at least the kids, on notice. That means that the kids would have a chance to object to this if they wanted to. I'm just going to give a little shout out. I'm drinking this 1911 sour. The can was designed by Tommy Lincoln of Stay Fresh, who also did our logo, if you can see the logo. Shout out to those guys. And shout out to 1911 for everything they're doing, making hand sanitizer. Where were we? So all the family members are getting regular notice of this. And if you have questions as I go along, drop them in the comments. So it's actually, I think, Carole going this way and going for guardianship or conservatorship of Don while he's missing for 5 years is actually incredibly stupid. If you're really just trying to take his money, that's the absolute wrong way to do it. I'm not going to tell you the right way to do it, but this process involved a lot of court proceedings, a lot of court filings. So if you're someone who is trying to pull a fast one, this would not be the way to do it. The kids would have access to significantly more information than if their dad had just stayed alive or if their dad had just outright died. They're getting regular updates, frequent updates by the volume of the documents. So if it was Carole's attempt to try to secretly control Don's assets, this is by far the worst possible way to do it. Now, who knows what happened? I'll leave it to you guys in the comments to let me know if you think she killed him or not, or what you think happened. I'd love to hear some of your conspiracy theories in the comments. And I don't know that this changes anything as it relates to Carole's beef with Joe Exotic, but it's certainly interesting. Another point to think of is that this is a back and forth in the docket. So we've got filings by Carole Baskin and then filings in opposition by some of the kids. So certainly some of the kids are, and there's hearings that were scheduled. I don't know what the content was of the hearings, but there's letters back and forth from lawyers. There's a lot of lawyers. A lot of lawyers look like they made a bunch of money on this case. But it's not as though this just happened in the middle of the night with no feedback from anybody. Additionally, another very interesting point that's not at all brought up in the documentary. We see Anne McQueen a lot, and she appears to be maybe the one person that had Don Lewis's best interest at heart, that she was loyal to him, was his assistant for a number of years. He trusted her to manage his affairs. He trusted her to keep control of the will and the power of attorney. However, on April 30th, 1998, Carole files what's called a petition to compel, which just means a petition to make someone do something, delivery of property and assets of Jack Donald Lewis. Now, what does this mean? Based on my review of the docket and my review of Carole's notes from her website, she was suing Anne McQueen to have Anne McQueen pay back $400,000 that belonged to Don. Now, we don't know, was that money that Anne inappropriately took? Was it money that was in the PSLR trust? But we know that she filed this petition in April of 1998, and I know that on December 22nd, 2000, Merry Christmas to Carole Baskin, she actually succeeded and got an order compelling Ann McQueen to turn over that property. So she won an order against Ann McQueen compelling the return of the property. This is not referenced. I mean, unless I missed something, this was not referenced at all in the documentary. So very interesting, I think, that the documentary makers, whether they knew about this or not, I can't imagine it didn't get brought up, but they chose not to include it. Now, we get to the end of the paper trail, sadly, when on October 8th, 2002, there's an order entered determining that Jack Donald Lewis, a.k.a. Don Lewis, has passed away. This is the elapsing of the 5-year period of time where once you're missing for 5 years in Florida, you're deemed dead. Now, one more point I'll have here, and I really hate to be the Carole Baskin defender. The documentary paints this as some kind of sinister action. So they make it seem like she was doing something untoward or inappropriate by having Don declared dead. But the reality is that the law in the state of Florida is once you're missing for 5 years, you're deemed to be dead. This makes sense too. Keep in mind, the whole time this case is going on, Carole's managing this money. It's likely not all going to go to her. I mean, we don't find out what's in Don's will or whatever happened to the distribution, but we know that the kids have said that they received at least 10% of his money. So you have to kind of call it eventually. He's missing for 5 years. The law in Florida says after 5 years, we deem them passed away. You'll get an order declaring him legally dead, and then you can move on and settle his estate and distribute whatever money is left. So the money was tied up in the guardianship for 5 years, and then after 5 years, it gets distributed. I really don't think that is anything inappropriate. I have my suspicions about what may have happened to Don, but I don't know that the filing of this application at the very end, they kind of make it out to be Carole, part of her evil plot. I don't buy that necessarily. That's something that would happen in any case where someone's been missing for 5 years. In the documentary, the kids say that they got about 10% of the total funds. It's really not possible for me to double check that based on the data I have available. Again, if you want me to go get the stuff, some of you have said, yes, get copies to research, do it. So here for this. So what? Did you guys not hear the tiger noise? Does that come through with my little tiger effect? Yeah. So it's not possible for me to double check. I got a few notes here on the wrap up of the money though. Based on Carole Baskin's notes from her docket, it does appear that the kids were beneficiaries of that trust that Ann McQueen was in charge of. So the kids would have received that money. It's unclear if they got money that was left over from Don's estate. Another point, though, just a kind of a legal point. You don't like my tiger roar? That's my wife. Why? Why not? Florida has, like every other state, what's called a Slayer statute. So the Slayer statute basically says that if you kill someone, you cannot legally benefit from their estate. And this makes sense, right? If it was found that Carole killed her husband, Don, she could not inherit from him. Now, this does not mean she has to be convicted of murder. Okay, so you remember the O.J. Simpson case, right? I think we all remember that. So in O.J. Simpson case, obviously the glove don't fit, you must acquit, right? Right, Johnny Cochran. Shout out to Johnny Cochran, rest in peace. So O.J. gets acquitted, but there's then a civil case from his deceased wife's family and her boyfriend's family that they win. And in that case, that's what they were trying to do. Under the Slayer statute, they were trying to prevent OJ from inheriting from his wife and get a civil judgment against him to recover money. So we have this in New York. They have it in Florida. The kids would not have had to prove that Carole Baskin killed, that they would not have had to convict her of murder in order to be successful in that case. So maybe they could have made some allegations about what happened to Don, and we could have fought that out in court. That doesn't look like that happened. But if the kids really wanted to fight this and prevent her from inheriting any money, then they absolutely could have done it under this what's called the Slater statute. I'm glad you guys like my sound effects. Thank you. I've been working really hard on this whole live broadcasting thing. Oh, my brother giving me a shout out. Thanks, buddy. I'm really interested to know what you guys think happened to Don Lewis, or any comments or questions you have about this. It's really kind of the break that I have needed from reality right now. I think there's a lot more to this story than the filmmakers paint. Now, spoiler alert, there is, I guess it's not a spoiler, there is some rumor, I think it's confirmed, that there's going to be another show airing this week, that they're going to air another episode, so maybe they're going to cover. I doubt they're going to cover this. This seems like they covered this a while back. Maybe it's an update on poor Joe. Free Joe Exotic. I really think that the representation of Carole Baskin as having taken all of Don Lewis's money needs to be explored further. I'm not going to say that for sure that didn't happen, but I think that looking at all of the evidence that we've now reviewed, I think it's very interesting that the filmmakers chose not to air some of this stuff. You've got some issues with the power of attorney. I think the power of attorney, they really did air that and make that pretty well known. But I really feel that there could have been more done, potentially, to talk about the litigation, maybe, right? All this litigation that we've talked about tonight, all the 42-page docket that we've got, that's just voluminous. Certainly the producers of a Netflix documentary would have been able to get their hands on these documents. If I could print out the 42-page docket after 5 minutes of a search and flip through it, and I guess I'll say here, if the Netflix documentary guys want to call me and have me weigh in on the docket, I'm happy to do it and explain it to them. Very easily retrievable. If you want the docket, you just go to hover.hillsclerk.com. So if you're a lunatic like me, you can search for Jack Donald Lewis. Jack, middle name Donald, last name Lewis. That will bring it up. Searching for Carole Baskin will not bring it up because she was not Carole Baskin at the time. She was Carole Lewis. What else do we want to cover? What else? We've got, if you want more fun stuff like this, go to themaronelawfirm.com, where we keep fresh content like this coming at you all the time. Yeah, my wife, Melissa, was there when it was printed. It was wild. Yeah, it was wild. So I can't speak to, in conclusion, I don't want to make the allegation that I think Carole did anything to her husband. I can't draw that conclusion. Frankly, it's for someone with more training and investigation work than me to do that. But I could tell you that she really screwed herself if she thought that that was the way to go to get his money, because by claiming that he disappeared instead of having a body or some kind of funeral, then, she really delayed her ability to get access to his money. I don't know why the Netflix documentary filmmakers omitted all this information. It was really easy to track down. Maybe they felt it didn't add to the Joe Exotic narrative, Joe Exotic trying to paint her as the killer. Um, yeah, I like this. If it looks like a tiger and walks like a tiger, she fed her husband to a tiger. Um, but I think the lesson here is pretty clear, right? Don't mess with tigers. No. If you want real estate planning help and you want to make sure that someone doesn't grab your will and run off with it and you're thrown into some kind of crazy court proceeding after you've passed away, check us out at theMaroneLawFirm.com. We offer efficient estate planning. We're rolling out our brand new all virtual social distancing system tomorrow. Carole Baskin seemed stoned through the whole documentary. Yeah, that she seemed to be on something. She loved the flower prints. Shout out to tie dye. You know, all the cool cats and kittens out there wearing tie dye. Yeah. So I don't. Does anybody think she didn't do it? I'd be interested to know that. If anybody thinks that she's innocent of in Don's disappearance. This is so insightful. What a guy. Thanks for that. OJ. Yeah, that's what this is a lot. This could be like the OJ. We'll be coming back. Like a lot of positive comments on the Marone Law Firm Cup. Oop. Hi, Melissa. This is the part where she's going to tell me to be quiet because I'm keeping the kids awake. I did. Yes. This is the part where the kids are still awake and are now messaging into the live stream. So, yeah. Yeah, I think everybody thinks she basically did it. The real problem from my perspective is that it's just a question of the sanctity of the documentary, right? Like if you believe in documentary filmmaking and you want to trust these folks who did it, well, you got to tell the whole story. Jack Donald Lewis also had a police officer called to his house in 1996 because a cougar escaped a cage. Wonder if he was talking about his wife or one of the animals. Yeah, well played. Here we go. Can we talk about how her new husband looks like Mitch McConnell and Prince Charles had a baby? Oh, we can talk about it. I mean, you're right. What about the clip when he's like dressed up and he's on the chain and she's walking him? Jen, yeah, shout out to Jen, my roommate from college. She's a emergency room nurse in Buffalo, New York. Thank you for everything you do, all the healthcare professionals. She's got her emergency room peeps watching. Consensus says she's guilty. That's great. We're going to be, for folks in central New York, we're going to be rolling out very soon some free planning for healthcare professionals to thank them for and try to get their plans in order as they continue to fight this coronavirus. So thanks to all the medical professionals. I'm sure that watching Tiger King is a welcome reprieve for those guys right now. So, oh yes, I missed this. Sardine oil. That's what did it. This is sardine oil for sure. Yes, I agree with this, Sheila. Her new husband stands by her side looking scared as he knows what can happen, right? The proof is in the pudding. You gotta mind your P's and Q's. That's absolutely right. I've loved this. Thank you guys so much for, and I'll stick around if you want to chat more. We call this the Tiger King hoax because I really think that, or the Tiger King exposed. I'm sorry, I don't want to mess up my own titles. The Tiger King hoax. There we go. Because I really think that you needed to see the full scale of both what Carole did and then really who's got clean hands here to talk about whether they were at fault or someone else was at fault or this person stole some of the money. I think the interesting lesson in all of this is that you should not be messing with tigers, right? Like that. There was a guy in Syracuse in the 90s who had tigers. I remember my dad knew him. He lived in Eastwood, of all places, and he had all these tigers and monkeys and all kinds of just wild stuff, literally wild stuff. And it's crazy. And I've got a client who shall remain nameless, who once upon a time said to me, he said, Anthony, we were talking about getting a little, I don't know if it was a little leopard cub or a little tiger cub, but he said, Anthony, I get you a tiger cub. I said, oh yeah, what are we talking? What's the price here? And he goes, oh, $2,000, about $2,000. I'm like, come on, you can't get a tiger cub for $2,000. And then we're sitting there last week watching this documentary, and I think the price was $2,000 or about $2,000, and my jaw hit the floor because I really didn't believe the person when they told me this. And turns out $2,000, you too can own a brand new little tiger. Just crazy times. I hope you guys are all staying safe out there. Thank you so much for joining the stream tonight. It was a little bit of a change of pace for me, not talking about all the new laws that have passed, which I'm happy to go into stuff like this. Stimulus check is spent. Yes, let's go. And maybe if there's new information that comes up that's relative to this point in this new episode that comes out this week, I'll pop back on. I'll let you guys know. Thank you all so much for coming. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe, everybody. That's right. Anthony Exotic signing off here for the last time.